Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. So now what we're going to talk about is formatting drives on our system. If you haven't already viewed the video that was just prior to this one for partitioning disks on our system, and you need to partition a disk on your system prior to formatting, I suggest you go ahead and view that one. That particular video is simply called Partitioning Storage Devices. So once we've partitioned our system and we know that we have disks that need to be formatted, we need to create or make a file system on those disks in order to be able to store and then mount them. So let's go ahead and use our fdisk command, which we talked about in a previous video, and look at all of the disks on our system. We have a couple of disks, SDA 1, 2, and 3, SDB 1, SDC 2, 1, and 2. Which of those do we have mounted currently? Well, we only have SDA 1 and 3. So SDA or SDB 1 and SDC 1 and 2 need to be formatted in order to be able to be used by a mount so that we can write files to them. So in order to do that, we need to make a particular type of file system. Now we can make file systems of almost any type. We can make swap file systems, ext2, ext3, ext4, JFS, XFS file systems. We can even make DOS16 as well as various Windows file systems like HPFS, UFS, etc. In this case, what we want to do is we want to make a couple of just standard Linux file systems. We want them to be at least journaled, so we'll do ext3. As long as your kernel has the support for the file system you want to use, and all of the ones I just named off the top of my head have built-in kernel support for the most part on any modern distribution. So we're going to format using ext3 or ext4 a couple of these systems. Let's assume that on our SDB1 or SDB disk that we want to take a look at what we have to format. So let's do dev SDB. We've got one drive, and let's format it as an ext4 file system so that we can use it and then mount it. So it's easy for us to do if we just execute a command, and you'll have to do this as root, or you'll have to do this as a sudo user. In this case, I'm doing sudo. So we're going to do mkfs. And mkfs will ask us for the file system type and the device. We're not going to pass in anything fancy in terms of formatting. We're not going to change the block size or anything like that. Let's just do a sudo mkfs-t for the type, ext4, and we're going to format dev sdb1. Now this is only a 1 gig disk, so it's actually not going to take very long, but if you have a disk that's terabytes and terabytes in size, you may spend more than a minute or two in formatting this particular disk. So in this case, it's going to give us information about the block size, fragment size, maximum file system blocks, etc. And it will mark the file system to be automatically checked every 33 mounts or 180 days, whichever comes first, and you can use the tune2fs to override that particular parameter. But now that we have a device, SDB1, that's been formatted after it was partitioned, we need to mount it in order to copy any files to it. So let's go ahead and clear the system, and we're going to go to the mount directory. The mount directory is very often where you'll find additional mount points for disks on your system. You can also sometimes find that in the media directory. So if we do an lsal on media, we'll see in this case there's a Dropbox mount, which is a mount that is for my Dropbox files. In our case, we're going to use the MNT file system. And as root, we're going to sudo make directory, and we'll call it disk B. And we'll say disk B1 because it's SDB partition 1. So now that we have disk B1, we need to use the mount command with the appropriate mount parameter. So we need to do a sudo mount -t ext4 dev sdb1 to mount disk B1. Now, You'll notice that we are passing in the file system type here, but in all likelihood, because ext4 is a supported file system type, the mount command will be able to read the super block of that particular partition and determine that it's an ext4 and mount it appropriately. However, in this case, we're sending it the -t ext4 to demonstrate the consistency between the mount command and the format command that we just went through, the mkfs, for making a file system. Now, it may not look like it did anything, but if we do a df-h now, we see that we have dev sdb has currently been mounted to mnt disk b1. Now we can do the same thing because we have sudo fdisk-l on dev sdc. We have two partitions. So there, let's format both of those as ext3 partitions. So that's easy enough using the command that we just talked about, mkfs-t ext3, and we're going to mount sdc1. And we're going to format it as an ext3 partition. Now we're going to do the same thing with sdc2. And now we'll create a couple of partition directories that we can mount those file systems in. Let's do a sudo make directory disk C1 and disk C2. Now that we have those, we'll execute the mount commands. And again, this must be done as sudo or the root user. Mount -t ext3 dev sdc1 to mount disk C1. And then we'll do the exact same command, only we're doing SDC and C2. If we do now a df-h, we'll see that we have SDB1 that's mounted to B1, SDC1 C1, SDC2 to disk C2. So now we have an additional disk that is 1 GB in size approximately, another that's about 500 meg, and a third that is 500 megabytes. Those are ext3 and 4 formats, and when we mounted those, we specifically passed in the format type. But let's see if it would be able to figure out whether that particular type needs to be mounted with a -t. So again, as root, in order to unmount a file system, we simply pass in umount, and all we have to do is tell it the directory that we want to umount. So we're going to sudo umount disk C, df-h shows that it is no longer mounted. So now let's try to do a sudo mount. We won't pass in the -t. We'll say sdc2, and we'll just say disk C2. Aha! And again, because ext3 is a file system with built-in kernel module support, it's compiled into support for ext-based file systems. The mount command reads the super block, and it determines that it knows what that file system is and how to mount it on that particular disk. And now if I look at the disk C2, it's created automatically a lost and found. If I do a sudo copy etc profile to here, then the etc profile is now copied. Now just for grins, if we did a sudo umount on the disk C2, and we go into disk C2, we see that there's nothing there, because this directory is representative of what disk used to be mounted here. By unmounting the file system itself, that disk, that file system and its contents are no longer visible. That does not mean, however, that they're gone, because I can just do a sudo mount dev sdc2 to disk C2, go back to disk C2, and the files that I copied are now back on the file system. So once we've partitioned our disk, we can format it however we want using mkfs and passing in the appropriate file system type. Then we can create mount points and then use the mount or umount command to mount or unmount them automatically at the command prompt for us. Next, we'll talk about how to add that to the particular file so that during the boot process, those disks will then be booted and available to us automatically without having to run these commands. But for formatting our file system, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.